Okay, the 16th example in Billy Martins Riddim on page 33 is a 2-3 clave and 6 part 2. So the bass drum is going to be playing on 1 and 4, boom, boom. Now this hi-hat is on 2, then the end of 3, then 5, then the end of 6. Boom, chuck, chuck, boom, chuck, chuck, boom, chuck, chuck, boom, chuck. And the third variation of the 2-3 clave is similar to the last one I did, except it has 2 extra hits on 1 and 4 with the bass drum. So it should go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 5, 6. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 5, 6. So you have the basic 2-3 clave in there, and then an extra one on 1 and an extra one preceding 4. The tom part's the same as the last one. 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6 and 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6 and. And today for the rudiment, I'm going to try something different. So I will only be playing a single stroke roll. But I have the way I have it programmed into Logic, I will be doing varying degrees of swing. So I have written here the standard ones, regular even eighth note, straight eighth notes. Here's the ratio, 1 to 1. And here is in Logic, each 16th note is divided into 240 parts. And this is where this particular swing will land. So a normal eighth note is going to be not late. Then this is how many frames late the and will be. All the ands, if you're counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and. So when most people think of swing, they think of a triplet eighth note with the first 2 eighth notes tied. So that's the second one. And that means it's going to be 160 frames late. Here's the ratio. So that's a 2 to 1, meaning the first note is twice as long as the second note. Next, it'll be a dotted eighth 16th, which I wrote 241 here. It's really going to be 1 on the next 16th note. But this is how many frames late it is. Well, it's really 240 frames late. Hopefully this kind of makes sense. Then Logic has A, B, C, D, E, 6 variations of swing that you can quantize eighth notes to. And that's these here, 40 late, 80 late, 121 late, 161 late. So that's the same as the second one, a triplet eighth note with the first 2 tied, 2 to 1 ratio. And by the way, the dotted eighth 16th is a 3 to 1 ratio. The first note's 3 times as long as the second note. Then it goes beyond a triplet, so more swung than a triplet eighth note, but not quite a dotted eighth 16th. 200 frames late. Then I repeat the dotted eighth 16th again. Then I go back to a triplet. I keep coming back to the triplet. Well, I come back to the triplet 3 times because that's a good reference point and a good way to start practicing a swing feel. And that's usually what most people are taught to start with. But my hypothesis is that most music that's swung is somewhere in between here, in between a regular eighth note and a triplet eighth note. And you'll probably hear that the dotted eighth 16th is going to be 2 swung for most circumstances, but it is in there twice for reference, as is the triplet. Now here, this one I had to customize 144 frames late. And if I did my math right, that's about as close as I can get to this quintuplet. I probably should have written these as 16th notes. Quintuplet 16th notes with the first 3 tied and the second 2 tied will give you a 3 to 2 ratio, meaning the first note is 1.5 times as long as the second note. Then I go backwards. So it goes, starts with the triplet, then very swung, then it goes back to just a little swung, then it gradually gets to very swung, then it goes back to a triplet, then it's this is slightly less swung than a triplet, the 144 quintuplet 3-to-2 ratio. Then we go backwards from back to 121, 81, 41. Then I went back to 81. The reason I did 81 3 times is because it's exactly in between the first two. Straight eighth notes and triplet eighth notes. And I think for this particular groove, that to me feels about right, probably. And then in the end, I go back to where I started with the normal even eighth note. And it's 16 measures of each. So I'm going to play the rhythm for 8 measures. Then I'm just going to play a single stroke roll for 8 measures. And I'm going to try to match the swing feel that I have quantized in there in Logic. And actually, I won't be playing, I'll be playing eighth notes, except for when I do the triplets, I'll play actual triplets. 1 tita, 2 tita, 3 tita, 4 tita, 5 tita, 6 tita for each beat. So I'm not going to be tying them when I do the fill, the rudiment fill. Then for this, I'm going to try to do 16th notes, which at 151 beats per minute is a bit fast for me. But I'm going to try it and see what happens. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say. And now I will start the backing track. And I have this here to help me keep track. But I should be able to just listen too. Oh, by the way, this backing track, what I've been doing is picking a different mode for each rhythm. So this one happens to be Mixolydian. Then I just make up a chord progression within that mode. So this one goes from I'm trying to make a dominant 7 chord sound like Roman numeral 1. So it goes G7, F major 7, back to G7 for 2 measures. Then it goes F major 7, D minor 7, back to G7 for 2 measures. So hopefully the 2 measures of G7 at the end of each 4 measure chunk makes that sound like the tonal center. And the D minor 7 is a minor 5 chord, which you don't hear that often, especially not in classical music, but sometimes you hear it. Here we go. Chop, chop, chop.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
So here's that list again. No, to be honest, I could feel my right foot dragging quite a bit and my left foot just not being precise. I think a lot of times when I listen back and it much sloppier than I realized, it's usually my feet, my left foot in particular. I think to get the hi-hat exactly right. And it's also hard to decide how loud to play the hi-hat. Seems like it can easily get lost, but it could also easily be too loud. I'm always open to welcome your constructive criticism. And if you'd like to let me know which of these you liked the best. The reason I put this quintuplet one in here is because I have a hypothesis that swing is related to the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean. And that if you look particularly at even eighth notes with a 1-to-1 ratio, and then triplet eighth notes with a 2-to-1 ratio, and then the quintuplet 16th notes with a 3-to-2 ratio, that is the Fibonacci sequence. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. And tending towards the golden mean. Really all of these, including an even eighth note, is tending towards the golden mean. In other words, you start perfectly even, then you oscillate back and forth between more or less swing, or a bigger or smaller ratio. Of all of these, this quintuplet I think is the closest to the golden mean. That's why I put it in there. And for example, let me just give you a few examples in case you're skeptical of my hypothesis. I want you to listen to these, just examples of songs that are definitely not even and definitely not triplet. They're somewhere in between. Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin is almost straight, but definitely not a triplet. Definitely not totally even, closer to even, but slightly swung. Sissy Strut by the Meters, I think is close to this quintuplet. 16th note with the first 3 tied and the second 2 tied, a 3-to-2 ratio. Where in that case, it's the 16th notes that are swung. Even if you listen to something like Maiden Voyage, that's it's on a jazz record, but it's not a swing song. It's not totally even, especially towards the end, or especially certain parts. I'm gonna guess that it's maybe less than this, 40 frames late, the eighth notes I'm talking about. Maybe it's 20, so it would be between number 1 and number 4 on this list. It's a little bit swung, tiny bit. And let's see what else. What'd I Say by Ray Charles? Definitely has swung 16th notes, but the eighth notes are not totally even either. Especially if you listen to the bass line in What'd I Say by Ray Charles. The eighth notes are not even, but they're definitely not a triplet. They're in between, closer to even, slightly swung. And I think it's a natural tendency. It's a human tendency, probably because most of us are one-eye dominant. Most of us are right-eye dominant and right-handed. And so it's natural for our left hand to lag behind our right. If anyone plays a single stroke roll, maybe the less trained you are, the more this might be the case. The left hand is going to tend to lag. Also, I think it has to do with a late eighth note. If we're in 4/4, let's say, and we're playing eighth notes, a late eighth note helps you feel the quarter note pulse harder somehow, even if it's just a little bit late. It's hard to explain what I mean, but just having a slight lilt to it makes you feel the beat better or stronger. You can tell where the beat is better with a slightly lagging eighth note feel. Let's say one more example. I can't think of a particular example, but if you listen to Latin jazz as opposed to swing jazz, where it'll say if you have it written out, it'll say on the chart straight eighth notes. Even that, a lot of it, like whether it's Brazilian samba or an Afro-Cuban salsa style, which are two very different styles that both share common roots that will get to both in this book later in the 4 and 8 chapters. I think most of it's a tiny bit swung. Like probably, even if it's only 10 frames late, the upbeats. There's a lilt to it. Having a slight lilt to it makes you want to move when you listen to it more so. Let me know what you think. Most people that I tell this hypothesis to think I'm crazy and they think I'm wasting my time practicing in between. But you tell me, if you listen to Sissy Strut, is it triplet eighth notes or 16th notes? No, it isn't. Almost, but not quite. It's swung. A lot of New Orleans stuff. Oh, another example is Stanton Moore actually talks about this. He calls it playing in the cracks. And I believe what he means when he says that is between even and triplet, whether it's eighth notes or 16th notes, depending on how you notate it. But listen to those. Just take those. Let's say 4 examples. Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin, Sissy Strut by The Meters, What I Say by Ray Charles, Maiden Voyage by Herbie Hancock. Listen closely to those and come back to me and tell me that it's one or the other, straight or swung. I think it's in between or slightly swung to a more or less degree. Rock and Roll being less and Sissy Strut being more. Okay, thanks for listening. See you next time. And the one I just did, I'm going to do with Fred Horn when he gets back for Freddie and Me 6. Thank you. Bye.